The dust swirled across the railway tracks like whispers of forgotten promises, catching the late afternoon sun in a golden haze as Emma and Genevieve Daniels stood hand in hand, their thin cotton dresses fluttering against their legs in the hot Arizona breeze. They'd been waiting since dawn, squinting toward the horizon where the parallel lines of steel disappeared into the shimmering heat, hoping for a train that might never come, their last chance to escape the hardship that had become their lives since their father's passing 3 months prior. Emma squeezed her younger sister's hand tighter. "It will come, Jenny, you'll see." The year was 1882, and the sisters had sold everything they owned except for the clothes on their backs and a small carpet bag containing their mother's silver hairbrush, a daguerreotype of their parents on their wedding day, and the remaining $14.35 to their name. Their destination was San Pedro, California, where their mother's sister had written promising work and shelter if only they could reach her. Look," Genevieve whispered, her voice wavering as she pointed not toward the expected direction of the train, but to the east, where a plume of dust signaled an approaching rider. The sisters watched as the silhouette materialized from the dust, a tall man astride a chestnut stallion that seemed almost too majestic for the barren landscape. The horse's gait slowed as it approached, coming to a stop just 10 feet from where the sisters stood beside the tracks. The rider, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, regarded them with curious intensity. "Afternoon, ladies," he said, his voice carrying a gentle drawl that seemed at odds with his imposing presence. "Train's not due for another 3 days. Washed-out bridge near Tucson." Emma felt her heart sink. 3 days. They had nowhere to go, no shelter from the elements, and barely enough money to feed themselves for that long. The rider shifted in his saddle, pushing his hat back to reveal a sun-bronzed face with eyes the color of the sky after a storm. He couldn't have been more than 30, with a strong jawline softened by the hint of compassion in his expression. "Name's Ethan Morgan," he offered. "I own the Cross M Ranch about 5 miles south of here. Might I ask what brings 2 young women to wait at the loneliest stretch of track in the territory?" Emma straightened her spine, still clutching Genevieve's hand. "I'm Emma Daniels. This is my sister, Genevieve. We're bound for San Pedro to stay with our aunt." She hesitated, then added with as much dignity as she could muster, "Our father passed, and there's nothing left for us here." Ethan Morgan studied them for a long moment, noting their respectable but worn dresses, the single carpet bag, and the determined set of the older sister's jaw, despite the fear evident in both their eyes. His horse snorted and pawed at the ground, as if impatient with its master's deliberation. "Miss Daniels," he finally said, addressing Emma directly, "I can't in good conscience leave 2 ladies to camp beside these tracks for 3 days. My ranch house has plenty of room, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, would welcome the company. I'd be honored to offer you shelter until the train arrives." Genevieve looked hopefully at her sister, but Emma hesitated. They knew nothing of this man beyond his name and the apparent prosperity suggested by his well-kept horse and quality saddle. Sensing her reservation, Ethan added, "I understand your caution, Miss Daniels. Perhaps this would ease your mind." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a silver badge. "I serve as deputy to Sheriff Wilson when needed. Not that you should take my word alone. You're welcome to speak with anyone in town about my character." "That won't be necessary," Emma replied after a moment's consideration. The alternative was 3 nights exposed to the elements and whatever dangers the open desert might present. "We accept your kind offer, Mr. Morgan, with gratitude." Ethan dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots raising small clouds of dust as they hit the ground. "Call me Ethan, please, may I?" he asked, gesturing toward their carpet bag. Emma reluctantly relinquished their sole possession, watching as he secured it to his saddle. "I'll walk alongside while you ladies ride," he offered, holding the reins of his horse steady. "Both of us?" Genevieve asked, eyeing the large stallion with apprehension. "Samson here has carried heavier loads through rougher country," Ethan assured her with a smile that transformed his weathered face. "He won't mind the company." With some maneuvering and Ethan's respectful assistance, Both sisters were soon settled on the horse's broad back, Emma in front with Genevieve holding tightly to her waist. Ethan took the reins and began leading them away from the tracks, toward what appeared to be nothing but open desert and distant mountains. "How far did you say your ranch was?" Emma asked, trying to ignore the unfamiliar sensation of being astride a horse for the first time in her life. "About 5 miles, Ethan replied, glancing up at her with those remarkable blue eyes. "We'll be there before sunset." As they traveled, the landscape gradually transformed from barren to beautiful. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels against the deepening blue of the sky, and creosote bushes released their distinctive scent as Samson's hooves disturbed their branches. In the distance, Emma could make out the purple shadows of mountains against the horizon. "It's beautiful out here," she admitted, feeling some of her tension ease as they put distance between themselves and the lonely railroad tracks. "Most folks just see the harshness," Ethan replied, his stride easy and measured beside the horse. "Takes time to appreciate the desert's gifts." "Have you lived here long?" Genevieve asked, her natural curiosity overcoming her initial shyness. "Born and raised on the Cross M," Ethan said. "My father staked his claim in '49 after returning from the Mexican War, built it up from nothing but dust and determination." "And your mother?" Emma found herself asking. A shadow crossed Ethan's face. "Lost her to fever when I was 14. Pa followed 5 years ago." "I'm sorry," Emma said softly, recognizing the familiar pain of loss in his voice. He nodded acknowledgement but didn't elaborate further. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they crested a gentle rise, and the Cross M Ranch came into view. Emma couldn't help the small gasp that escaped her lips. Nestled in a valley with a creek running alongside, it was a substantial adobe ranch house, several outbuildings, corrals containing horses, and in the distance, cattle grazing on what appeared to be surprisingly lush grassland. "It's not what I expected," Genevieve said with wonder in her voice. Ethan chuckled. "The creek makes all the difference. Underground spring feeds it year-round. My father knew what he was doing when he chose this land." As they approached, a woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was round-faced and gray-haired, with an expression that shifted quickly from curiosity to concern as she spotted the 2 young women on Ethan's horse. "Ethan Morgan, what mischief have you gotten yourself into now?" she called, though her tone was more fond than scolding. "Mrs. Abernathy, may I present Miss Emma Daniels and her sister, Miss Genevieve," Ethan said formally as they reached the yard. "Ladies, this is Mrs. Abernathy, who has kept me fed and somewhat civilized since I was knee-high to a grasshopper." The older woman's eyes widened slightly at the introduction but quickly softened. "Well now, isn't this a pleasant surprise? Come down from there, girls, and let's get you settled. You look like you could use a proper meal and some rest." With Ethan's assistance, the sisters dismounted, both slightly wobbly after the ride. Emma tried to mask her discomfort, but Ethan noticed her wince as she straightened her skirts. "First time riding?" he asked quietly. She nodded, a hint of color touching her cheeks. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's spent most of his life in the saddle," he assured her. "You'll feel better after some of Mrs. Abernathy's cooking and a night's rest." The housekeeper was already ushering Genevieve toward the house, asking about their journey and expressing dismay at the news of the delayed train. Emma moved to follow but paused to look back at Ethan. "Thank you," she said simply. "Your kindness won't be forgotten." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition of something in her that resonated with him. "It's what neighbors do out here, Miss Daniels. Survival depends on it." "Emma," she corrected him. "If I'm to call you Ethan, then you must call me Emma." He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Emma, then. Welcome to the Cross M." That evening, after the most substantial meal they'd enjoyed in months, Emma and Genevieve found themselves seated on the ranch house's wide porch, watching as the last light faded from the western sky. Mrs. Abernathy had insisted on washing their travel-worn clothes, and had provided them with simple cotton nightgowns covered by robes that, while much too large, were clean and comfortable. "How old are you, if you don't mind my asking?" Ethan inquired as he offered each sister a cup of coffee sweetened with condensed milk. I'm 22, Emma replied. Jenny is 18. Just turned 18 last month, Genevieve clarified, always precise about details. Ethan nodded, settling into a chair across from them. At 31, he was neither too young to be dismissive of their situation nor old enough to be viewed as a father figure. And your plans in San Pedro? Our Aunt Martha owns a millinery shop, Emma explained. She's offered Genevieve an apprenticeship and said she could find clerical work for me with one of the merchants. Have you experience with bookkeeping? Our father was the station master at Wilcox for 15 years before he fell ill, Emma said. I assisted with his ledgers and correspondence for the past 5 years. Ethan looked impressed. That's valuable experience. Though San Pedro is growing rapidly with the railroad's expansion, you might find better opportunities than you expect. We're prepared to work hard, Emma assured him, her chin lifting slightly. We always have. He studied her for a moment, taking in the quiet dignity that seemed to radiate from her despite her circumstances. There was a strength there that reminded him of his mother, a woman who had faced the hardships of frontier life with unfailing grace. I've no doubt of that, he said finally. It takes a certain kind of courage to leave everything behind and start anew. We didn't leave much behind, Genevieve said, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. The railroad company claimed our house was company property after Father died. They gave us 2 weeks to vacate. Jenny, Emma admonished gently, but Ethan held up a hand. No, she's right to be angry. That's shameful behavior, even by railroad standards. His jaw tightened. I've had my own disagreements with the Southern Pacific. They've been trying to claim water rights to portions of the creek that runs through my property. Can they do that? Emma asked, genuinely concerned. Ethan's expression darkened. Not without a fight. Water is more precious than gold out here. The conversation might have turned even more serious if not for the sudden appearance of a large orange cat that leapt onto the porch railing and regarded the visitors with suspicious yellow eyes. Well, look who's decided to grace us with his presence, Ethan said, his tone lightening. Ladies, meet Rusty, the most effective mouser west of the Mississippi, according to his own estimation. Genevieve immediately brightened, extending her hand toward the cat. Hello, Rusty. Aren't you handsome? The cat considered her gesture for a moment before gracefully leaping down and approaching, first sniffing her fingers, then rubbing his head against her hand with surprising affection. Well, I'll be, Ethan said with a low whistle. Rusty doesn't usually take to strangers. You must have a way with animals, Miss Genevieve. I've always loved them, she admitted, scratching behind the cat's ears as he settled into her lap, purring loudly. Father never allowed pets because of the station, but I used to feed the strays when he wasn't looking. Emma watched her sister's face soften with pleasure as she petted the cat. It had been too long since she'd seen Jenny so relaxed, so unguarded. The past year of their father's illness had stolen much of her youthful exuberance, forcing her to grow up too quickly. Your sister has a kind heart, Ethan observed quietly to Emma, his eyes reflecting the warm glow of the lantern hanging from the porch ceiling. She does, Emma agreed. Sometimes I worry it will make her vulnerable in a world that isn't always kind in return. The world needs more kindness, not less, Ethan replied, though I understand your concern. A brother's protective instinct isn't so different from a sister's, I imagine. Do you have siblings? Emma asked, realizing how little they knew about their host beyond the barest details. A shadow passed over Ethan's features. Had a younger brother, Edward. Lost him in '79 during an Apache raid on a neighboring ranch. He was helping return some stolen cattle. I'm so sorry, Emma said, instinctively reaching out to touch his arm before catching herself and withdrawing her hand. Ethan noticed the aborted gesture and gave her a small, sad smile. It was a different time. Relations with the Apache are more peaceful now, thank God. Chief Nate and the Army reached an understanding of sorts last year. The conversation drifted to lighter topics as the evening progressed. Ethan proved to be well informed about current events, despite the ranch's relative isolation, explaining that he subscribed to newspapers from as far away as San Francisco and St. Louis. He was articulate and thoughtful, challenging Emma's preconceived notions about ranchers and their interests. It was well past midnight when Mrs. Abernathy appeared, hands on her hips to shoo them all to bed. Dawn comes early on a ranch, and those cattle won't wait for you to finish your beauty sleep, Ethan Morgan. He laughed and rose obediently. Yes, madam, ladies, I'll bid you good night. Sleep well. As Emma followed Mrs. Abernathy to the room she would share with Genevieve, she found herself oddly reluctant for the evening to end. There was something about Ethan Morgan, a quiet integrity, an understated intelligence that intrigued her more than she cared to admit. He's a good man, Mrs. Abernathy said, as if reading her thoughts, pausing outside the bedroom door. One of the best, lost too much, too young, but it never hardened his heart. She fixed Emma with a knowing look. That's rare in these parts, Miss Daniels, rarer than gold. Before Emma could formulate a response, the housekeeper had bustled away, leaving her with the unsettling feeling that her interest in their host had not gone unnoticed. The following morning, Emma woke to sunlight streaming through curtains that were finer than any she'd had in her own home. For a moment, she was disoriented, until the events of the previous day came rushing back. Beside her, Genevieve still slept peacefully, her hair spread across the pillow in a golden fan. The smell of coffee and bacon drew Emma from the bed. She dressed quickly in her now clean traveling dress and made her way to the kitchen, where Mrs. Abernathy was orchestrating what appeared to be a feast. Good morning, dear, the housekeeper greeted her warmly. Did you sleep well? Better than I have in months, Emma admitted. May I help with breakfast? You certainly may not. You're a guest in this house. Mrs. Abernathy waved a wooden spoon for emphasis. Though you can pour yourself some coffee if you'd like. Ethan's already been out since dawn, but he should be back shortly for breakfast. As if summoned by her words, the back door opened and Ethan entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. He was dressed for work in a simple cotton shirt, denim trousers, and worn boots, but somehow managed to look as commanding as he had the day before. Morning, he greeted Emma, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. Did you rest well? Very well, thank you, she replied, suddenly conscious of her appearance in the morning light. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, wishing she'd taken more time with her toilette. Thought I might show you and your sister around the ranch today if you're interested, he offered, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Abernathy. Unless you'd prefer to rest after your journey. I'd like that very much, Emma said, perhaps too quickly, and I'm sure Jenny would as well. She's never been on a ranch before. Neither have you, from what I gather, Ethan observed, his tone gently teasing. No, Emma admitted with a small laugh. The closest I've come is watching cattle being loaded onto train cars. Well then, you're in for a treat. The Cross M isn't the biggest spread in Arizona territory, but we've got the best water and the fattest cattle for 100 miles. There was pride in his voice, not boastful, but earned the pride of a man who had worked for everything he had. Emma found herself responding to that sincerity, that groundedness that seemed so different from the men she had known in town. Genevieve joined them soon after, and following a breakfast that included eggs, bacon, biscuits, and preserves, to put some meat on those bones, according to Mrs. Abernathy, Ethan took them on a tour of the ranch. The property was more extensive than Emma had initially realized, encompassing not only the grazing land visible from the house, but also stretches of higher country, where Ethan explained the cattle were moved during the hottest summer months. The creek that ran through the property was indeed substantial, creating a ribbon of green life that contrasted starkly with the surrounding desert. This is the heart of the ranch, Ethan explained as they stood beside the clear, flowing water. Without it, none of this would be possible. It's beautiful, Emma said, watching as small fish darted in the shallows. I can see why you fight to protect it. Ethan glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. Most people see only the practical value the cattle it waters, the crops it irrigates. Few appreciate it for its own sake. Well, they're missing something important then, she replied. Beauty has its own value, doesn't it? He studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. It does indeed, Emma, it surely does. Their tour continued to the corrals where several cowboys were working with young horses. Ethan introduced them to his foreman, Miguel Hernandez. a dignified man in his 50s who tipped his hat to the ladies with old-world courtesy. "Miss Emma has never ridden before yesterday," Ethan informed Miguel with a wink. "Perhaps we should remedy that during her stay." "Oh no," Emma protested, remembering the soreness from their short journey the day before. "I couldn't possibly. Daisy is gentle as a lamb," Miguel assured her, gesturing toward a dappled mare watching them curiously from the corral. "Perfect for a lady's first proper ride." Genevieve, who had been quiet during much of the tour, suddenly brightened. "Could I try too?" "It looked wonderful when you and Emma rode yesterday." "Of course," Ethan agreed readily. "We'll start with some basic instruction this afternoon if you're willing." And so, after the midday meal, the sisters found themselves back at the corrals, this time dressed in borrowed trousers that Mrs. Abernathy had unearthed from somewhere, more practical than getting your skirts all dusty, dears, and receiving patient instruction from Ethan on mounting, holding the reins, and maintaining their balance. Emma was tentative at first, remembering her discomfort from the previous day, but Daisy proved to be as gentle as promised. By the time an hour had passed, she was walking the mare around the corral with growing confidence, Ethan's encouragements bolstering her courage. Genevieve, to everyone's surprise, took to riding with natural ease. "She sits a horse like she was born to it," Miguel commented to Ethan as they watched the younger sister guide her mount through simple turns and stops. "She has good instincts," Ethan agreed, though his attention was primarily on Emma, whose serious concentration as she mastered each new skill stirred something protective in him. When Emma finally brought Daisy to a stop beside him, her face was flushed with exertion and pleasure. "I think I understand now," she said breathlessly. "Why people love this, I mean, there's a freedom to it." "There is," he agreed, reaching up to adjust her grip on the reins slightly, his hand warm over hers. "Nothing quite like it in the world." Their eyes met and held for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and Emma felt a flutter of something unfamiliar in her chest. She looked away first, focusing on straightening her posture as Ethan had taught her. "Tomorrow, if you're not too sore, we might try a short ride outside the corral," he suggested. "There's a spot by the creek where the wildflowers bloom after the spring rains, still some color left if you're interested." "I'd like that," Emma replied, surprised by how much she meant it. The remainder of the day passed pleasantly, with the sisters helping Mrs. Abernathy prepare supper despite her protests, and then joining Ethan on the porch again as twilight descended. This time, Ethan brought out a worn copy of Twain's The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and read aloud by lantern light, his resonant voice giving life to the characters in a way that had both sisters laughing. As they prepared for bed that night, Genevieve sat brushing her hair at the small vanity, watching Emma's reflection in the mirror. "I like it here," she said simply, "more than I expected to." "It's only temporary, Jenny," Emma reminded her gently. "The train will come and we'll continue to San Pedro as planned." "I know." Genevieve set down the brush, turning to face her sister directly. "But have you considered that perhaps there might be opportunities here as well? You seem to connect with Mr. Morgan." Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Don't be silly. We've known him all of one day." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Genevieve said with a wisdom beyond her years. "Mother always said she knew she would marry father the moment he helped her with her parcels at the station." "That was different," Emma protested weakly. "Was it?" Genevieve climbed into bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin. "I saw how he looked at you today while you were riding, and how you looked at him." "Go to sleep, Jenny," Emma said, extinguishing the lamp to hide her flustered expression. But as she lay in the darkness, she couldn't help replaying the day's events in her mind, the warmth of Ethan's hand over hers, the approval in his eyes when she mastered a new riding skill, the way his voice had softened when he spoke of beauty having its own value. It was foolish to entertain such thoughts, she told herself firmly. They were dependent on his charity for the moment, nothing more. In 3 days, they would board the train to California and likely never see Ethan Morgan again. The thought brought an unexpected pang of regret that followed her into uneasy dreams. The next morning dawned clear and cooler than the previous day, with a breeze that carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Emma rose early, leaving Genevieve still sleeping, and made her way to the kitchen where she found not Mrs. Abernathy but Ethan himself preparing coffee. "Good morning," he greeted her, seeming unsurprised by her early appearance. "Mrs. Abernathy's gone to tend to her sister in town. Took ill during the night, apparently. Nothing serious, but she asked if we could fend for ourselves today." "Of course," Emma said, immediately moving to the stove. "I'm quite capable in a kitchen. What would you like for breakfast?" Ethan's eyebrows rose. "You don't need to cook for me, Emma. I've been managing on my own since before Mrs. Abernathy came to work here." "I don't doubt it," she replied, already reaching for eggs on the sideboard. "But it seems only fair to contribute something in return for your hospitality." He watched her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but at least let me help. And for what it's worth, your company is contribution enough. It gets lonely out here sometimes." The simple admission touched her. "Do you never think of marrying?" she asked, then immediately regretted the personal nature of the question. "I'm sorry, that was impertinent." "No, it's a fair question," Ethan said, cracking eggs into a bowl while she sliced bread. "I've thought of it, of course, but suitable women are scarce in these parts, and I've never been one for the social whirl in Tucson or Phoenix." He glanced at her. "And you?" "No young man waiting for you in Wilcox." Emma shook her head. "Father's illness consumed the last years. There wasn't time or opportunity for courting." She didn't add that the few potential suitors had quickly lost interest when it became clear that Emma Daniels came with responsibilities, an ailing father and a younger sister to support, and no dowry to speak of. They worked together comfortably, moving around each other in the kitchen with surprising ease, and by the time Genevieve joined them, a respectable breakfast was laid out on the table. "Mrs. Abernathy would be impressed," Ethan commented as they ate, "though perhaps not with my biscuits." "They're not so bad," Genevieve said diplomatically, though her expression as she bit into one suggested otherwise. They all laughed, and Emma was struck by how natural it felt. This shared meal in the morning light, as if they'd known each other for years rather than days. After breakfast, true to his word, Ethan saddled horses for all three of them, Daisy for Emma, a gentle gelding named Pepper for Genevieve, and his own Samson. They rode out from the ranch at a leisurely pace, Ethan keeping a watchful eye on both sisters but particularly on Emma, who still showed signs of nervousness despite her determination. The spot by the creek that Ethan had mentioned proved to be a small meadow where, as promised, late wildflowers still bloomed in patches of purple, yellow, and white. A stand of cottonwood trees provided shade, their leaves rustling in the breeze. "It's lovely," Emma said as Ethan helped her dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist, "like a secret garden in the middle of the desert." "That's exactly what I've always thought," he replied, seeming pleased by her appreciation. "My mother used to bring us here for picnics when we were boys. Said it was proof that beauty could flourish anywhere, given half a chance." They spread a blanket beneath the trees while the horses grazed nearby, and Ethan produced a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and dried fruit from his saddlebags. As they ate, he pointed out various plants and explained their uses, which were medicinal, which the Apache had taught his father could be eaten in lean times, which were poisonous and to be avoided. Genevieve, ever curious, peppered him with questions about the ranch, the land, and the wildlife. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Emma found herself equally drawn into Ethan's stories about growing up on the frontier. "What about you, Emma?" Ethan asked eventually. "What was life like at the railroad station?" She thought for a moment. "Structured, predictable." "Everything revolved around the train schedules." A smile touched her lips. "But I loved watching the people coming and going, starting new adventures or returning home, each with their own story." "You have a romantic soul," Ethan observed. "Do I?" She seemed surprised by the assessment. "I've always considered myself rather practical. The two aren't mutually exclusive," he said. "The most enduring romance is built on practical foundations, I think. Shared values, common goals, mutual respect." "You sound like you've given it some thought," Emma noted. "I've had time to think out here," he admitted. "Perhaps too much time." There was something in his tone, a hint of loneliness, quickly masked, that made Emma's heart ache for him. Despite the success of his ranch, the respect he clearly commanded from his workers. There was a solitude about Ethan Morgan that resonated with her own. After lunch, Genevieve wandered off to collect wildflowers, staying within sight but giving the adults a measure of privacy that Emma suspected was deliberate. "Your sister is perceptive beyond her years," Ethan commented, watching as Genevieve carefully selected blooms for her bouquet. "She's had to be," Emma replied. "Our mother died when she was 10. She grew up quickly after that." "As did you, I imagine," Emma nodded, plucking a blade of grass and twirling it between her fingers. "Someone had to manage the household. Father did his best, but he was a man," Ethan finished for her, understanding in his voice. "We're not always equipped for certain aspects of family life, especially after losing a spouse." "He retreated into his work," Emma said, the memory still painful. "The railroad became his whole world." It was as if he believed that if he kept the trains running on time, he could somehow maintain control over a life that had derailed when Mother died. Ethan's hand covered hers where it rested on the blanket. "I'm sorry, Emma. It couldn't have been easy, assuming such responsibility so young." His touch was warm, calloused from years of ranch work but gentle nonetheless. Emma found herself turning her hand to lace her fingers with his, the gesture as natural as breathing. "I don't regret it," she said softly. "Caring for those we love isn't a burden, it's a privilege." Ethan's eyes, so blue against his tanned skin, held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're a remarkable woman, Emma Daniels." For a moment, it seemed as if he might lean forward, might close the small distance between them. Emma found herself hoping he would, a realization that both thrilled and frightened her. The moment was broken by Genevieve's return, her arms full of wildflowers and her cheeks pink with excitement. "Look what I found. Aren't they beautiful?" Ethan withdrew his hand from Emma's, but the warmth of his touch lingered as he turned to admire Genevieve's bouquet with appropriate enthusiasm. The ride back to the ranch was filled with comfortable conversation, but Emma was acutely aware of a shift in the atmosphere between herself and Ethan, an unspoken acknowledgement that something had changed. Some boundary had been crossed. That evening, as the sisters prepared for bed, Emma found herself unusually quiet, lost in thought about the day's events and what they might mean. "You're falling in love with him, aren't you?" Genevieve asked directly as they braided each other's hair, a nightly ritual since childhood. "Don't be absurd," Emma replied automatically, though without conviction. "We've known him for 2 days. 2 very important days," Genevieve pointed out. "And you haven't answered my question," Emma sighed, setting down the hairbrush. "I don't know what I feel, Jenny. It's all happened so quickly, and even if I were developing feelings, it doesn't change our plans. We've committed to Aunt Martha. We can't simply abandon her after she's made arrangements for us." "But if there were a possibility for happiness here," "There isn't," Emma interrupted firmly. "Ethan has been kind and generous, but that doesn't mean he's interested in anything beyond hospitality to 2 stranded travelers." Genevieve gave her a knowing look. "If you believe that, you weren't paying attention today when he looked at you." Emma felt her cheeks warm at the memory of Ethan's intense gaze, the feel of his hand holding hers. "Go to sleep, Jenny. We have 1 more day here, and then we board the train for San Pedro as planned." But as she lay awake long after her sister had fallen asleep, Emma found herself wondering what might have happened if Genevieve hadn't returned when she did, if Ethan had leaned forward those few inches, if she had allowed herself to acknowledge the feelings stirring within her. The final day of their stay at the Cross M dawned with unexpected activity. Emma woke to the sound of men's voices, raised in argument coming from the direction of the ranch yard. Curious and slightly alarmed, she dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where she found Mrs. Abernathy returned from town, kneading bread dough with unusual vigor. "What's happening?" Emma asked, peering out the window toward the source of the commotion. Mrs. Abernathy's expression was thunderous. "Railroad men," she spat, as if the words tasted bitter. "Come to discuss water rights, they say, more likely to threaten and intimidate." Emma felt a chill despite the warmth of the kitchen. "Where's Ethan?" "Out there, holding his ground." Mrs. Abernathy punched the dough with particular force, as he should. "Those vultures have been trying to claim the creek for months now. saying they need it for their steam engines. Never mind that it would destroy everything Ethan's family has built here. Concern propelled Emma to the front porch, where she found Ethan standing tall before three men in suits, the contrast between his practical ranch clothes and their Eastern attire striking. Miguel and several cowboys stood a short distance away, their postures tense and watchful. "The law is clear, Morgan," one of the men was saying, his tone condescending. "The Southern Pacific has development rights throughout the territory, including water access for the expansion of the line. Not to private water sources on established ranches," Ethan countered, his voice level but firm. "My family's claim predates your company's presence in Arizona by a decade, Mr. Hargrove. The creek runs through my property, and the water rights are legally mine." The man called Hargrove thin-faced with cold eyes noticed Emma's presence on the porch and smiled thinly. "Ah, you have guests. How charming." He tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Madam, I do apologize for this intrusion. Railroad business, you understand." Before Emma could respond, Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between her and the railroad men. "Miss Daniels and her sister are traveling to California. Their train was delayed due to your company's failure to maintain the bridge near Tucson properly." Hargrove's smile faltered slightly. "Regrettable, but these things happen. Progress comes with occasional inconveniences." "Inconveniences?" Emma couldn't contain herself. "Is that what you call forcing people from their homes when they've nowhere else to go?" All eyes turned to her, Ethan's widening in surprise at her intervention. "I beg your pardon," Hargrove said stiffly. "My father was Station Master William Daniels at Wilcox," Emma continued, her voice steady despite the anger coursing through her. "He served the railroad faithfully for 15 years. When he died, your company gave us 2 weeks to vacate our home, claiming it was railroad property despite my father's understanding that it would pass to his family upon his retirement or death." Hargrove had the grace to look momentarily discomfited, but quickly recovered. "Company policy, Miss Daniels. Nothing personal, I assure you." "It was very personal to us," she replied coldly, "as I'm sure Mr. Morgan's water rights are to him and everyone whose livelihoods depend on this ranch." Ethan's expression as he looked at her contained equal parts concern and admiration. "Emma, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do," she interrupted gently. "Some things need to be said." One of the other railroad men, older and more distinguished in appearance, stepped forward. "William Daniels, you say?" "From Wilcox?" "Yes," Emma confirmed, eyeing him warily. "I knew your father, Miss Daniels. A fine man dedicated to his work." He extended his hand. "Edward Whitfield, Vice President of Operations for the Southern Pacific in Arizona Territory." Emma shook his hand cautiously, surprised by the genuine warmth in his expression. "If what you say is true about the handling of your father's death, then I offer my personal apologies," Whitfield continued. "That is not how we wish to treat the families of our loyal employees." Hargrove looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Sir, company policy clearly states—" "I'm well aware of company policy, Hargrove," Whitfield cut him off sharply. "I'm also aware of the discretion we're granted in applying it." He turned back to Emma. "Where are you and your sister headed, Miss Daniels?" "San Pedro," she replied. "Our aunt has offered us positions there." Whitfield nodded thoughtfully, then looked to Ethan. "Mr. Morgan, I believe we may have approached this water rights issue with unnecessary aggression. Perhaps we can discuss a more equitable arrangement, one that respects your legal claim while addressing the railroad's legitimate needs." The shift in tone was remarkable. Hargrove looked as if he might protest, but thought better of it when Whitfield gave him a quelling glance. "I'm willing to discuss reasonable solutions," Ethan said cautiously. "As long as they don't threaten the viability of the Cross-M." "Fair enough," Whitfield agreed. "Shall we continue this conversation inside where it's cooler, with your permission, of course?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded, gesturing toward the house. As the railroad men moved toward the porch, he hung back, touching Emma's arm lightly. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly, "but thank you." "It wasn't just for you," she admitted. "It felt good to finally speak up about what happened to us." His hand slid down to clasp hers briefly, out of sight of the others. "Nevertheless, I'm grateful, and impressed. The negotiations continued through much of the morning, with Emma excusing herself to join Genevieve, who had finally awakened and was full of questions about the visitors. By midday, an agreement had been reached. The Southern Pacific would be granted limited access to a downstream portion of the creek, where they would construct a small reservoir for train water needs, while the main flow would remain undisturbed for the ranch's use. In return, Ethan would receive fair compensation and a guarantee of access to lower shipping rates for his cattle. As the railroad men prepared to depart, Whitfield approached Emma where she sat with Genevieve on the porch. "Miss Daniels, I've been thinking about your situation," he said. "If you're amenable, I'd like to offer some compensation for the hasty treatment you received following your father's passing. Not charity, mind you, but recognition of his years of service and the mishandling of his affairs." Emma was startled by the offer. "That's very kind, Mr. Whitfield, but I insist," he said firmly. "William Daniels was one of our finest station masters. The company owes his family better than what you received." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "This should help establish you in San Pedro. Consider it delayed payment of the pension your father should have received." Overwhelmed, Emma accepted the envelope with trembling hands. "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. This is unexpected but deeply appreciated. Will you be on tomorrow's train?" he inquired. Emma nodded, a strange reluctance gripping her at the confirmation of their departure. "Yes, that's our plan. Then perhaps we'll see you aboard. I'll be returning to California myself." With a tip of his hat to both sisters, Whitfield rejoined his colleagues, and soon the railroad men were riding away from the ranch, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Ethan joined the sisters on the porch, looking both relieved and thoughtful. "That went better than I expected," he admitted. "Largely thanks to you, Emma. I only spoke the truth," she said modestly. "Sometimes that's all it takes." His gaze lingered on her face, and there was something in his expression, a mixture of admiration and something deeper, more complex, that made her heart quicken. "Mr. Whitfield offered us compensation," Genevieve explained, gesturing to the envelope Emma still held, "for the way the railroad treated us after Father died." "Did he now?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Well, it seems you made quite an impression, Emma." "Apparently so," she agreed, still somewhat stunned by the turn of events. "It changes things, Jenny. We'll have more options when we reach San Pedro. We won't be quite so dependent on Aunt Martha's charity. Or," Genevieve suggested hesitantly, "it might give us options beyond San Pedro." Emma shot her sister a warning glance, but it was too late. Ethan had caught the implication, and his expression shifted, becoming carefully neutral. "You should certainly consider all your options," he said after a moment, his tone deliberately casual. "San Pedro is growing rapidly with the railroad expansion. There will be many opportunities for capable young women such as yourselves." An awkward silence fell, broken only when Mrs. Abernathy called them in for the midday meal. Throughout lunch, Emma was acutely aware of a new tension between herself and Ethan, a sense of unspoken possibilities hovering just beyond reach. After the meal, Ethan excused himself to attend to ranch business, leaving the sisters to help Mrs. Abernathy with household chores and preparations for their departure the following day. The housekeeper, normally talkative, seemed subdued, occasionally casting glances at Emma that suggested she had thoughts she was struggling to keep to herself. Finally, as they folded linens together while Genevieve was occupied elsewhere, Mrs. Abernathy spoke her mind. "He'll miss you, you know, more than he'll admit, even to himself." Emma's hands stilled on the sheet they were folding. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do, dear," the older woman said gently. "I've known Ethan Morgan since he was a boy. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." "We've only just met," Emma protested weakly. "Sometimes that's all it takes," Mrs. Abernathy echoed Genevieve's words from the night before. "Especially out here, where life can be harsh and moments of connection are precious." Emma carefully placed the folded sheet in the linen cupboard, buying time to compose herself. "Even if what you say is true, and I'm not convinced it is, we have commitments in San Pedro. Our aunt is expecting us. Commitments can be adjusted. Letters can be written explaining changes in circumstances." Mrs. Abernathy's practical tone softened. I'm not telling you what to do, Emma, only suggesting that you listen to your heart as well as your head before you board that train tomorrow. The conversation left Emma unsettled, her thoughts in turmoil as she went through the motions of packing their meager belongings for the journey ahead. The envelope from Whitfield lay on the dresser, unopened, a tangible reminder of unexpected possibilities. By the time evening arrived, Ethan had still not returned to the house. Miguel informed them at supper that the boss was checking on a sick calf at the far end of the property and might be late returning. He asked me to convey his apologies, the foreman added, his dark eyes kind as they rested on Emma's face, and to assure you that he will see you ladies safely to the train in the morning. Emma nodded, ignoring the pang of disappointment that threatened to overwhelm her. Of course. Please thank him for his hospitality when you see him. Later, as darkness fell and the house grew quiet, Emma found herself unable to sleep. Careful not to wake Genevieve, she slipped from their bed, donned her robe, and made her way to the porch, seeking solace in the cool night air. The sky was a tapestry of stars, more brilliant than she had ever seen them in town, and a quarter moon cast enough light to illuminate the yard and the shadowed shapes of the outbuildings beyond. She leaned against a porch column, trying to make sense of the conflicting emotions swirling within her. In just 3 days, she had come to feel more at home at the Cross M than she had anywhere since her mother's death. There was a rightness to being here, a sense of belonging that both comforted and terrified her. How could she develop such feelings so quickly? And what was she to do about them? The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the path leading to the ranch house. A rider approached slowly Ethan, his silhouette unmistakable even in the dim light. He dismounted with fluid grace, leading Samson toward the stable, but paused when he caught sight of her figure on the porch. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, as if drawn by an invisible thread, Ethan secured his horse to a hitching post and approached the house, his boots crunching softly on the packed earth of the yard. "Emma," he said as he climbed the porch steps, her name both a greeting and a question. "I couldn't sleep," she explained unnecessarily. "Too many thoughts." He moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring in the darkness. "I know the feeling." They stood in silence for several heartbeats, both looking out at the star-strewn sky rather than at each other. "I wanted to thank you," Ethan finally said, his voice low. "For what you did with the railroad men. You spoke up when you didn't have to, and it made a difference." "I'm glad," she replied simply. "Your ranch is worth fighting for, Ethan." He turned to her then, his expression hidden in shadow but the intensity of his gaze palpable nonetheless. "And what about you, Emma? What's worth fighting for in your life?" The directness of the question took her breath away. I've been focused on survival for so long. On taking care of Genevieve, on finding a new place for us after we lost everything. And now," he pressed gently, "with Whitfield's compensation changing your circumstances." Emma took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Now I find myself wondering about possibilities I hadn't considered before." Such as? There was a careful neutrality in his tone, as if he was holding himself in check, waiting for her to define the boundaries of this conversation. "Such as whether San Pedro is truly where we belong," she admitted. "Whether there might be other options worth exploring." Ethan took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool night air. "Emma, I don't want to presume, and I know we've known each other only briefly, but—" He paused, seeming to struggle for words, an unusual circumstance for a man typically so articulate. Emma waited, her heart thundering in her chest. "These past 3 days," he continued finally, "have shown me something I didn't expect to find. In you, I've discovered a kindred spirit, someone who understands duty and responsibility, but also beauty and possibility." His voice grew stronger, more certain. "I'm not asking you to abandon your plans or your commitment to your sister. I'm simply asking if you might consider staying not as a guest, but to see if what's begun between us might grow into something more." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Ethan, you don't need to answer now," he interrupted gently. "I know it's sudden, perhaps even foolish, but out here we learn to recognize value when we find it, whether in land or water or—" His hand rose to touch her cheek with exquisite tenderness. Or in a remarkable woman who stands up to railroad barons and rides a horse for the first time with determined grace? Emma leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly as she allowed herself to acknowledge the depth of her feelings. "It's not foolish," she whispered. "Unexpected, yes. But not foolish." His other hand came to rest at her waist, drawing her slightly closer. "What are you saying, Emma?" "I'm saying that I need to speak with Genevieve," she replied, looking up into his face, now visible as her eyes adjusted to the moonlight. "This decision affects her too. But if she's willing, I'd like to stay, at least for a time, to see where this might lead." The smile that transformed Ethan's features was like sunrise breaking over the desert, gradual, then radiant. "That's all I'm asking for, a chance." "A chance," she echoed, her own smile blossoming in response. He leaned forward slowly, giving her ample opportunity to withdraw if she wished. Instead, Emma rose slightly on her toes to meet him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that was gentle yet profound, a promise, a beginning. When they parted, Ethan kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I've never believed in fate," he murmured. "Always thought a man made his own destiny through hard work and determination, but finding you and your sister waiting beside those tracks, I'm beginning to reconsider." Emma laughed softly, her hands resting lightly on his chest. "Perhaps fate simply presents the opportunity. It's still up to us what we do with it." "Wise as well as beautiful," he said, pressing another quick kiss to her lips before reluctantly stepping back. "It's late, and you have an important conversation ahead with your sister tomorrow. We should both get some rest." Emma nodded, though she was reluctant for the moment to end. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Emma," he replied, his voice warm with promise. "Sweet dreams." As Emma returned to her room, her heart lighter than it had been in years, she found Genevieve sitting up in bed, a knowing smile on her face. "So," her sister said without preamble, "are we staying?" Emma shook her head in amused exasperation. "Were you eavesdropping?" "I might have heard voices and gotten curious," Genevieve admitted shamelessly. "The window was open." "Jenny, this is serious. Our plans were to go to San Pedro to work with Aunt Martha." "Plans change," Genevieve interrupted firmly. "Especially when something better comes along." Her expression softened. "I've never seen you look at anyone the way you look at Ethan, and I've never seen anyone look at you the way he does, like you're the sunrise after the longest night." Emma sank onto the edge of the bed, touched by her sister's perception and eloquence. "But what about you?" "Your apprenticeship with Aunt Martha, the life we planned in California." Genevieve took her hand. I can learn millinery anywhere. And did you know that Mrs. Abernathy mentioned there's no proper dressmaker for 50 miles? The women around here have to order their good dresses from Tucson or make do with what they can sew themselves." Her eyes sparkled with excitement. "I could learn both trades, serve a real need in the community." "You've given this some thought," Emma observed, both surprised and touched by her sister's consideration. "I've had 3 days to watch you fall in love," Genevieve replied simply, "and to fall a bit in love myself with this place, with the life here." She squeezed Emma's hand. "I want to stay, Em. If Ethan's offering us that chance, I think we should take it." Tears pricked at Emma's eyes. "Are you sure? Truly sure?" "More sure than I've been about anything in a long time," Genevieve assured her. "Besides, with Mr. Whitfield's compensation, we have options. If it doesn't work out here, we can still go to San Pedro later." The practicality of this observation made Emma laugh through her tears. When did my little sister get so wise? "Around the same time my big sister started letting herself feel something besides responsibility," Genevieve retorted with affectionate teasing. "Now, can we please go to sleep? We have a letter to write to Aunt Martha tomorrow, and I want to be clear-headed for it." Morning brought with it a clarity and certainty that Emma had not felt in years. She and Genevieve rose early, drafted a warm but firm letter to their aunt explaining the change in their circumstances, including a promise to visit when possible, and then went to find Ethan. He was in the barn, checking Samson's tack in preparation for taking them to the train station, his expression guarded until he saw their faces. "We'd like to stay," Emma said simply, her heart swelling at the joy that transformed his features. "Both of us, if your offer still stands." "It does," he assured her, crossing the barn in 3 long strides to take her hands in his. "It absolutely does. Genevieve cleared her throat pointedly. "I'll just go tell Mrs. Abernathy the good news, shall I?" Without waiting for a response, she slipped out, leaving them alone among the scents of hay and leather. "Are you certain?" Ethan asked, his thumbs tracing circles on Emma's palms. "I don't want you to feel pressured," or she silenced him with a kiss, surprising herself with her boldness but encouraged by his immediate response, his arms encircling her waist, drawing her close as he returned the kiss with gentle passion. "I'm certain," she said when they parted, slightly breathless. "We both are. This feels right, Ethan, like finding a home I didn't know I was searching for." His smile was radiant. "Then welcome home, Emma Daniels." And in that moment, standing in a sunlit barn with the promise of a new beginning stretching before them, Emma knew with absolute certainty that fate had indeed brought them to those railway tracks where Ethan Morgan's horse had stopped beside them. But it was their choice that would write the rest of their story together. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day with the desert painted in hues of gold and russet, Emma Daniels became Emma Morgan in a simple ceremony at the Cross M Ranch. Genevieve, radiant in a dress of her own design, stood beside her sister as witness, while Miguel Hernandez stood with Ethan. Mrs. Abernathy, beaming with satisfaction at the match she had subtly encouraged, provided a feast that would be remembered throughout the county for years to come. Edward Whitfield, true to his word, had not only compensated the sisters generously for their father's service, but had also become a vocal advocate for fair treatment of railroad employees and their families throughout the territory. He attended the wedding with his wife, presenting the couple with a deed to an additional parcel of land adjoining the Cross M land that included a section of the creek that might otherwise have fallen into railroad hands. Genevieve, with typical determination and creativity, had established herself as both apprentice milliner, learning through correspondence with Aunt Martha, and aspiring dressmaker. Her natural talent had already attracted clients from as far away as Tucson, and she spoke of opening a proper shop in the nearest town once her skills were fully developed. As for Emma, she had discovered in herself abilities she had never recognized during her years of self-sacrifice in Wilcox. Her organizational skills, honed through years of assisting her father with the station's operations, proved invaluable in helping Ethan modernize the ranch's business practices. Together, they were expanding the Cross M Tickets operations, improving breeding stock, and exploring new markets for their cattle. But more than these practical successes, Emma had discovered the joy of partnership with a man who valued her mind as much as her heart, who saw her strength as complementary to his own rather than threatening. And Ethan had found in Emma not only a wife but a true companion who understood the land and its demands, who shared his vision for the future while honoring the past that had shaped them both. Standing on the porch of what was now their home, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of fire and gold, Emma leaned into her husband's embrace, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Happy?" Ethan asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Completely," she assured him, turning in his arms to meet his gaze. "Though I still can't quite believe how it all happened. If the bridge hadn't washed out, if we hadn't been standing by those tracks when you rode by. If my horse hadn't decided to stop right there, as if he knew something I didn't," Ethan added with a smile. "Call it fate or chance or divine intervention, I'm just grateful it brought you to me." Emma reached up to trace the beloved contours of his face, still sometimes amazed that this good, honorable man was hers. "As am I, though I think perhaps it wasn't just fate that brought us together." "No." His eyebrows rose in question. "No," she said firmly. "It was also courage yours in offering shelter to two strangers, mine in taking a chance on a new beginning rather than clinging to the safety of our original plan." Ethan's arms tightened around her. "You're a wise woman, Emma Morgan." "And you're a fortunate man," she teased, rising on her toes to kiss him as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "That," he agreed fervently against her lips, "is the absolute truth." As twilight deepened around them, Emma thought of the uncertain girls who had stood beside those railroad tracks 6 months before, holding hands as they faced an unknown future. They could never have imagined the joy that awaited them when a dusty cowboy on a chestnut horse stopped beside them like fate itself had arrived. Life in the Arizona Territory would never be easy. There would be droughts and floods, harsh winters and scorching summers. There would be challenges in the cattle business, negotiations with the ever-expanding railroad, and the constant work of maintaining and improving the ranch. But facing these challenges together with love, respect, and shared purpose made even the hardest days worthwhile. As Ethan led her inside to where Genevieve waited with Mrs. Abernathy and their ranch hands for the evening meal, Emma felt a deep contentment settle in her soul. Here, among these good people, on this land that demanded much but gave back in equal measure, she and her sister had found not just shelter but belonging. And in Ethan's eyes, she had found a home for her heart. 5 years later, the Cross M Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous operations in the Arizona Territory. The main house had been expanded to accommodate not only Ethan and Emma's growing family, now including 3-year-old William and infant daughter Mary, but also Genevieve's thriving dressmaking business, which occupied what had once been a seldom-used formal parlor. Genevieve, at 23, had established herself as the premier dressmaker and milliner in the region, her creations sought after by ranchers' wives and townspeople alike. She had recently begun courting with the local schoolmaster, a thoughtful young man from Boston who had come west seeking adventure and had found his calling educating the scattered children of ranchers and townspeople. Emma, balancing motherhood with her role as partner in the ranch's operations, had never been happier. The challenges were many: drought one year, excessive rains the next, fluctuating cattle prices, the ongoing expansion of the railroad with its attendant changes to the territory, but she and Ethan faced them together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. On the anniversary of the day they had met, Ethan still took Emma riding to the spot by the creek where wildflowers bloomed, where he had first dared to hope she might consider a life with him. It had become a tradition, a time to reflect on their journey and to renew their commitment to each other and to the life they were building. Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you'd gotten on that train to San Pedro? Ethan asked as they sat beneath the cottonwood trees, the creek gurgling peacefully nearby. Emma considered the question, watching a butterfly dance from flower to flower. Sometimes, she admitted, but only in the way one wonders about a path not taken with curiosity, not regret. Ethan took her hand, his thumb brushing over the gold band he had placed there 5 years before. I thank God every day for whatever twist of fate brought you to those tracks at the exact moment I was riding by. As do I, Emma said softly. Though I think perhaps it wasn't just fate, but something more deliberate, as if all the choices we both made throughout our lives were leading us to that moment, preparing us to recognize each other when we met. Ethan smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening lines earned through years of squinting into desert sun, of laughter, of living fully in this harsh but beautiful land. My philosophical wife, he said with tender amusement, always finding deeper meaning. Someone has to, she teased, leaning against his shoulder. Otherwise, you'd attribute everything to luck and hard work. Those do account for a great deal, he pointed out. Yes, but not for love, she countered. Not for the feeling I had when I first saw you riding toward us through the dust, like something important was about to happen. He kissed her then, a kiss that held the comfort of familiarity but still sparked with the passion that had drawn them together from the beginning. I felt it too, he admitted when they parted. Like recognizing something I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching the play of light through the cottonwood leaves, listening to the water's gentle music. Emma thought of the frightened, determined young woman she had been, standing beside those tracks with Genevieve's hand in hers, facing an uncertain future with nothing but courage and hope. We should visit those tracks someday, she suggested. Take the children when they're old enough to understand the story. We will, Ethan promised. We'll tell them how 2 sisters waiting for a train that never came found something better than they were looking for, and how a lonely rancher's life was transformed when his horse decided to stop beside them. Emma laughed. "We'll tell them that sometimes the best journeys are the ones you never plan to take, and that home isn't always where you expect to find it." As they rode back to the ranch, side by side on horses they now both handled with easy confidence, Emma looked out over the land that had become so dear to her, the rolling grasslands dotted with cattle, the distant mountains purple against the sky, the adobe buildings of the Cross M nestled in their protected valley. She thought of their children growing up here, learning to ride and rope, to respect the land and its gifts, to value hard work and integrity above all else. And she thought of those railroad tracks, stretching across the territory like promises of connection and possibility, tracks that had led not to San Pedro as planned, but to a destiny far richer than she could have imagined when she and Genevieve stood beside them, holding hands in the desert sun, waiting for a future that arrived in a form they never expected. As the ranch came into view, Emma saw Genevieve on the porch with little William, both waving as they spotted the riders approaching. Mrs. Abernathy appeared in the doorway, baby Mary in her arms, the picture of domestic tranquility against the backdrop of the rugged frontier. "Race you home," Ethan suggested with a boyish grin that made her heart skip even after all these years. Emma returned his smile, gathering her reins. "You're on." They spurred their horses forward in unison, laughing as they galloped toward the people and place they loved, the dust of their passage rising golden in the afternoon light, much like the dust that had heralded Ethan's arrival that fateful day when two sisters held hands beside the tracks, and a cowboy's horse stopped beside them like fate itself had arrived, changing all their lives forever.